Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Safe Deposit Krabs and Plankton's Pet. It's funny, I ended up writing this introduction after I wrote every other part of the script. I mention this because where I normally would not have a connection to make between these two episodes, I do now, but I'm not gonna say it because I don't want to, I guess, spoil the surprise. I guess a connection I can make without doing that, kind of, is that this pair of episodes focuses on each half of the Krabs and Plankton rivalry, so kind of fun that they're paired together like this. There. Perfectly vague connection that keeps my further thoughts under wraps. That is until about 10 seconds from now. And so, as always, thank you all for checking out today's video, and now let's just get right into it. Safe Deposit Krabs is a great example of one of my favorite qualities of modern, or at least relatively newer SpongeBob, given how old this episode is now, and that is how the show is increasingly spending more time with characters that aren't SpongeBob. I think I've mentioned this a few times now, maybe even as recently as my review of Jailbreak. I don't really feel like checking, but the point is, this expanded focus allows for more stories to be told. Now, don't get it twisted, I love SpongeBob, like the character. He's my favorite character in the show, along with Gary, and if every episode in the show was about him, I'd probably still be happy. But if the show is going to have an ensemble cast, then by God, it should be using that ensemble cast, which means we should be getting episodes centered on all the members of the cast, even if the vast majority of episodes are, and should be, surrounding SpongeBob. And this take shouldn't come as a surprise given how I complain about specifically the woman in the ensemble cast being underutilized every few business days. It's funny I say all of this though, because really, Safe Deposit Krabs isn't quite that kind of episode. SpongeBob is still a major player here, but this episode is certainly a step in the direction that has given us episodes like Mall Girl Pearl or Bassword. So I just felt it prudent to point this out. Alright, let's dive into the actual episode now. That was my longest intro in like forever. Well, anyway, Safe Deposit Krabs is a pretty simple episode. So simple that sometimes I feel like this episode is like 8 minutes instead of 11. We start with a news report for the new Bank of Bikini Bottom Bank, which is offering instant interest for the first 100 customers to join the bank. This, of course, catches the attention of Mr. Krabs, who rushes over there despite his hatred of banks that the Lost Mattress told us about. See, if you really think about it, this is just Mr. Krabs' money tunnel vision, his short-sightedness, showing up again. I do so love consistent character traits. I also love how fast-paced this beginning is. It takes like 30 seconds for the episode to begin, and for Mr. Krabs to be at the bank. SpongeBob doesn't even say anything here. And as I mentioned before, Mr. Krabs is largely the centerpiece of this episode, so it's good that he's pretty entertaining here, being his delightfully money-loving self. The Bank of Bikini Bottom Bank is heaven for him, until he learns how a bank works. You know, what if this episode takes place before The Lost Mattress? At least if you want to put this show's episodes in some sort of timeline. I just think it would be funny that this incident made Mr. Krabs lose all trust in banks. Alright, well anyway, so Mr. Krabs shows up at the bank, and I love how his obsession with money ends up getting him kicked out of the bank. Like, that is so damn funny, especially with how damn creepy Mr. Krabs is here. And then I love how the bank teller immediately sees through his first disguise when he comes back. So then Mr. Krabs dons a better disguise and returns to the bank, this time keeping his money obsession in check, barely, and he wants instant interest. But of course, he needs to actually put money in the bank for that, and I love how dramatic he is about being parted with his penny. I also think there's something really funny about this episode being at least partially about this bank marketing scheme that you could actually find in real life, like an episode of a children's show about the bank. Do y'all get what I'm saying? There's just an amusing juxtaposition here. Because Mr. Krabs is so dramatic about being parted with his penny, he ends up getting a safety deposit box for the penny. Mr. Krabs says that he needs a moment with his penny alone, which is already funny, and then he climbs into the safety deposit box, which is just so unhinged, I love it. This ends up with him getting locked in the safety deposit box, and then the actual vault of the bank, aka Money Heaven. I love the way Clancy Brown delivers, "I've landed in money nirvana." Much of the rest of the episode consists of him hanging around with the money, which quickly devolves to him becoming delirious from oxygen deprivation, which I don't think that would happen in this case, especially not so quickly, but it's funny anyway, so I don't actually care. If you really think about it, this is just like a prototypical version of Married to Money. I also liked Mr. Krabs' throwaway line about not tipping the money waiter. I love how quickly things devolve into chaos for him though, especially when everything is suddenly on fire. In the meantime, since this episode has a tiny little B plot going on, SpongeBob's closing up the Krusty Krab and finds that he can't find Mr. Krabs anywhere. And whereas Squidward has the more realistic apathy befitting of a boss like Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob is a devoted employee searching for him everywhere. I like that Pearl appears in this episode too, although not for long. We also see a departure here from the show's decision to not showcase any modern technology by having Pearl toss SpongeBob a mobile phone and telling him to call Mr. Krabs on his cell, so that was neat. This show is pretty careful about not playing into technology creep so that it doesn't date itself, but some things just need to be added, it seems. SpongeBob calls Mr. Krabs, who helpfully tells SpongeBob that he's locked in the bank and is running out of oxygen. I love how Patrick has no qualms about SpongeBob needing to break into a bank. That's a ride or die right there, and that's exactly what I like to see. Patrick is honestly really funny in this episode. His supporting role is great, and the scene of them breaking into the bank was very amusing. As I watch Safe Deposit Krabs, I'm reminded a lot of Toy Store of Doom. The plots are very similar, and I find it interesting how in the end, each episode goes differently because of the differences in the characters involved. Like, Mr. Krabs is not prone to the same kind of fear and paranoia as SpongeBob and Patrick, although I guess he is paranoid here, but he's a fighter, not a runner. And I love how SpongeBob and Patrick manage to break into the bank right as it opens, and Patrick just runs off. Mr. Krabs fighting the vacuum is also amusing, and then both SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are kicked out of the bank. At least Mr. Krabs gets his instant interest, another penny. I had a good time watching Safe Deposit Krabs. I wouldn't say there was anything I really super loved. Yes, I know I always say I love how, but have you considered that there's only so many words I can choose from, and I like how just doesn't have the same oomph. But Safe Deposit Krabs was an enjoyable watch and a good, solid episode that brought to mind some of my favorite qualities of newer episodes of this show. And so, all of this is why this episode is going to go in my great tier, where it comes in with a score of 8.8 out of 10. Up next, Plankton's Pet, which is yet another episode that is an example of this relatively newfound quality of having not every episode of this show be SpongeBob-centric. Kind of funny how the previous episode was about Mr. Krabs, and this one is about Plankton. With SpongeBob playing a major supporting role in both episodes, these episodes are, on paper, kind of foils to each other, which is pretty neat. Another neat thing about this episode is that it begins the whole running joke of having Patrick being like a pet in earnest. I mentioned it before with Gary's new toy, but this is where it really begins, considering how consistent it becomes after this. Especially since this bit is usually, with a couple exceptions, done when we have a Plankton and Spot episode. But that's a topic for another time. Let's dive in. So, one thing I really like about this episode is how although this episode is about Plankton, it's not about his villainy. It's just him living life outside of that, and that's great because it helps to further justify his existence as a main character in an ensemble show like this, as in he can do more than just be the antagonist every single time. And again, it means more stories can be told about him, since he doesn't just have to exist in that mold of trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula. And yes, I say all this knowing that this episode still begins with a Plankton scheme, but the point is that that's not what the entire episode is about, or the end goal of it at all. In fact, the whole reason Plankton gets a pet in this episode is so that he doesn't think about the formula and his failure to steal it. So yes, in a way, this is still Plankton being motivated by the formula, but it's a bit different than us sitting here watching him try to steal it for the millionth time, you know? And no, that's not me saying that I'm tired of Plankton plots. I still love them. I'm just making my point about having this opportunity to witness Plankton doing something else for once. Alright, I'm repeating myself now. Probably a sign I should move on. So, like I just said, Plankton's Pet begins with a typical Plankton scheme for trying to steal the formula. I thought the scene was pretty funny because it's so hilariously macabre to have Mr. Krabs behead this baby before anyone in universe realizes it's not an actual baby. Now, imagine if Squid Baby was funny like this, bro. And then everyone being so mad that Plankton toyed with their emotions was also hilarious. And in the group of folks outside of the Krusty Krab, seeing Mr. Krabs seemingly punt a baby and therefore beating his ass was, again, funny as fuck. When Plankton returns to the chum bucket having failed, Karen suggests that he get a hobby, just find something to not obsess over the formula anymore. If you think about it, Karen is like the audience here, given how much the fandom likes saying that exact talking point. Karen suggests that Plankton get a pet, and then SpongeBob appears out of literally nowhere to help Plankton find one, which I find hilarious. Let's bring back kinda creepy SpongeBob. It's been a while since we've seen him. SpongeBob suggests that Plankton check out the animal shelter to get a pet, and we learn that apparently SpongeBob got Gary from the animal shelter. As much as I love that origin, I'm gonna have to ignore it in favor of the origin from Sponge on the Run because it's too good. Anyway, I really like the SpongeBob and Plankton interactions in this episode because I like when they're friendly like this. I'm sure that SpongeBob considers Plankton a friend at times like this, though Plankton would never admit that he feels similarly, even though the writing is on the wall. Eventually, after we get a quick joke of Patrick also just being in the animal shelter, Plankton comes across a little amoeba shaped like a dog who SpongeBob names Spot. I love how SpongeBob is the one to name Spot. More crumbs of my Plankton and SpongeBob friendship agenda. Anywho, Spot is freaking adorable, and he's one of my favorite additions to the SpongeBob cast. I'm so glad that we'll be seeing more of him in the future. I also love how Spot's introduction is him saving Plankton. This episode is just so adorable. Watching Plankton interact with Spot is just so fun and cute. Spot's little tail wagging, bruh, so adorable. And Plankton freaking out when he accidentally crushes Spot with a tennis ball is hilarious. I also loved the bit right after this where Plankton's like, I hope nobody saw that emotional outburst, and then a bunch of hobbyless people are watching him, and he was like, shoo! That was pretty funny. The second iteration of that joke was great too. I like how I said all that mess at the beginning of this episode about Plankton outside of stealing the secret formula, and then in the middle of the episode he starts training Spot to go steal a patty, which Spot does with ease. Listen, I still stand by what I said. Plankton being obsessed with the formula is a staple of his character, so that's never going to fully go away in any episode, but this episode certainly breaks barriers when it comes to Plankton not only concocting some sort of scheme for the entirety of the 11 minutes, and I love how Spot eats the patty as a reward, which makes Plankton put him outside for time out, which he can only handle for a few seconds, but those few seconds were all that was needed for Spot to suddenly go missing. It really is so funny to watch Plankton deal with the woes of pet ownership. Plankton is really just the epitome of the dad that didn't want a pet stereotype, and it's perfect. So, SpongeBob and Plankton go on the search for Spot, which leads them to the animal shelter. This part of the episode is also really funny. I like the build up to the reveal that SpongeBob opened the animal pens, and I like how it turned out that Spot was just on Plankton's eye the whole time, and then Spot saves them all because he's the best. I liked Plankton's pet a whole lot, like a hell of a lot. It was great watching Plankton in this new context, and I love Spot. This episode is also just so cute and heartwarming. Like, seeing Plankton actually care about this little amoeba dog is such a wonderful little character evolution. It's weird using a term like that for a show like SpongeBob SquarePants, but I'm not sure how else to describe it. Season 9 and future seasons are definitely big on altering character dynamics, and one of the biggest alterations is how friendly and familiar SpongeBob and Plankton have become with each other. And this, of course, has been a thing ever since Fun, as the dynamic between SpongeBob and Plankton is one of the foundational ones of this show. This same dynamic of SpongeBob clearly caring a lot about Plankton shines in episodes like Single Cell Anniversary and One Course Meal too, but it isn't until episodes like this, where Plankton isn't being actively antagonistic, that a new level, I guess, of this dynamic was born. It feels like there's no actual hatred between SpongeBob and Plankton anymore, and their opposing sides in episodes after this is just business. I like that dynamic a lot, and I like this episode a lot, and so I'm putting it in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.3 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. I'd almost forgotten about how these two episodes are actually rather emblematic of some of the big shifts that happened this season as we get close to the post-second movie era, which, oh boy, I have to actually review that movie soon. We'll get there when we get there, but don't be surprised if I need to take an extra week to put that review together. Man, the original reviews for these two episodes were embarrassingly short. I mean, thinking about the time that I posted them, I could see why that probably was, but good lord, I had to do a lot of work to get these reviews to video-ready shape. Good thing I was in a writing mood like I mentioned during the closing thoughts of my last review, huh? Okay, well, I think that's all for me today, so I'm gonna go ahead and close things out here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.